Hello, this is a collab with Gabriela Khan, where we are going to discuss 6 unknown or rather darker aspects related to art and its history and use. Without much further ado, let's start with 3 interesting things about Middle Eastern and Islamic art that you might not have known about. I use Middle Eastern and Islamic as separate categories because what I'm discussing here is broader than just Islam. And just because it comes from the Middle East does not mean that it automatically must be Islamic. Though every example I will use here will come from the Islamicate world. That is to say, the domain where Islam was the practiced religion. Alright, without further ado, number 1. Art of Mohammad and art of other important religious figures, such as other prophets, do exist in certain Islamic traditions. Not all interpretations of Islam agree that paintings that depict religious figures or human figures at all are forbidden. In fact, there has been quite a few that have even seen pictures of prophets and Muhammad himself as being a way to strengthen the faith, by explaining events through pictures, or using the pictures as a focus for faith. Other interpretations have simply allowed it, seeing no harm in it, with certain conditions. A very common condition is that the religious figures depicted should be faceless, and thus in older paintings they are often faceless. But there also exists exceptions, with important figures depicted with faces, as can be seen here. The reason as to why many prophets are depicted as faceless is due to the fact that giving them a face might make them a focus for worship, which would be setting them up as being vectors of worship other than God, and thus considered shirk or polytheism, which is a sin. A grave sin in Islam that there is no excuse for and is considered unforgivable. However, not everyone agrees with this interpretation of pictures needing to be faceless. Nor has everyone obviously agreed in the historical sense with this either, as you can see with these pictures. Another thing that is very common with Islamic and Middle Eastern art depicting religious figures is that they are surrounded by fire, as fire has associations with the divine, with purity, and it is thus fitting that it surrounds important figures in their depictions, giving them that holy aura or holy presence that should be revered. This is equivalent to the glorias usually held by religious depictions in the Western Christian world. Glorias does also exist in Islam, so it's not something unique to only the Western world and or Christianity. Pictures have been used thus in certain forms of Islam, and especially in Shia Islam. Even to this day, you can see the selling of paintings of Ali and his son Hassan and Hussein, and even of the Prophet Muhammad himself on the streets of Iranic cities. This is because 12-hour Islam does not see the problem in depicting these figures in art, as long as it's respectful to their holy legacy. In fact, you could say that pictures almost plays a religious role as an object to focus one's worship, almost to a Christian-like degree with their use of icons. Speaking about using icons as gateways to get into the deeper meaning of the faith, certain Sufi orders have used icons to focus their faith, to get closer to the divine. Thus, the icon stance is not the only stance that exists within the Islamic faith with regards to religious icons and religious paintings. Number 2.
there exists a lot of raunchy or risque art that has historically existed. And I am talking about full-blown nudity, which I am going to censor in this video because I don't want to get into trouble. And I want to keep this channel somewhat family friendly. And failing that, at least somewhat decent. Anyway, art depicting nudity, and especially female nudity, has existed from the Umayyad period, let's say the very first period of Islamic history, you could say, directly after the famous four righteous caliphs. As you can see, the art of this time took great inspiration from Roman art, especially earlier Roman art, which is not that strange considering that the Umayyads were in control of the territory that had belonged to the Roman state historically. And thus both them, like in this case of this fresco upon the wall of an Umayyad palace, and the Arabs underneath their dynasty took influences from them. Though this is still a bit more raunchy and risque than was usually the case in the Byzantine Empire. So the Umayyads pretty much revived the old tradition, the old Roman tradition of nakedness. But it was not only the Umayyad period that saw somewhat risque art, but also the Abbasid period. So it did not disappear after the Abbasid revolution, in which the Abbasid dynasty took power from the Umayyads. This sort of risque and raunchy art did also not disappear after the Abbasids. And one other interesting aspect regarding this sort of art is that it also included religious art. Adam and Hawa, or Adam and Eve, are depicted upon this painting. Now, this is not without a greater context. The tradition of nudity in art should be seen in together with the poetic traditions that have also evolved. And I am here speaking about poets like Abu Nuwas, who dealt with rather mature subjects that are not really good to discuss in a family-friendly environment. But suffice to say, people like Abu Nuwas and many other poets dealt with those subjects, and there also existed subject manuals that are quite famous, related to the pleasures of the flesh, so to speak. Some were even made by famous Islamic scholars. God, this is embarrassing. The explanation for these things being allowed, this sort of art and the other forms of culture related to rather risque and raunchy subjects, is that paintings are not real people, and neither are the people described in poetry or in manuals. Thus, they are allowed Islamically to exist. Now, please, let us leave this subject fast and return never. حتى نتكلم عن شعر الحسن في المستقبل. Number 3. The paint used on old paintings and the ink in old manuscripts can be toxic. And no, I'm not kidding. Many old types of paints or inks did use various substances that are toxic to humans in order to create the paints or the ink. This is especially the case for old Ottoman manuscripts and paintings, and a certain type of red pigment that was common to both ink and paint. As the red pigment was based upon a mineral that contains mercury and was found in the middle of what is modern-day Turkey. This mercury does seep out from the pigment of the paint or the ink through time, which can cause mercury poisoning if not handled carefully. When archivalists and restorers touch these objects and old manuscripts containing this sort of paint or ink. This is less of a problem with open paintings as the air ventilations makes it so that the mercury will disappear and it will not accumulate. However, the manuscripts that are in codex form, let's say book form, the pages often make it so that the mercury gets trapped. This means that you often need to have gloves when you handle these sorts of paintings, and manuscripts that contain paintings or have this sort of ink in their normal writing, you have to read or view through using a ventilation box so that you don't accidentally poison yourself. Seriously, old paintings and the like can be dangerous if they are contained in a codex format and thus have not been exposed to air because the pages of the book have prevented airflow. This can give a new meaning to the term
dangerous art.
Anyway, these were 3 short interesting things about art from the Middle East and the Islamic world that I thought could be interesting for you.
Hello, and that was that with regards to the 3 things of the 6 things related to art. If you want to know the rest, that is to say the 3 remaining things related to art, head over to Gabriela Khan's channel and look at her video. The link is both in the description and embedded in the video here. And also don't forget to ask questions, as I am always open for questions regarding my videos. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.